Ahmed is one of Morocco's more than 2 million casual workers. He used to sell clothes in one of Rabat's many traditional marketplaces, or souks. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, he's had to shut his store and is selling face masks and gloves instead.
We don't have a choice. We don't have a monthly salary like others, civil servants or those who work in departments. A street vendor has nothing at all.
After declaring a state of emergency, the government of Morocco ordered the suspension of most commercial and social activities. That included closing cinemas, gyms, mosques, restaurants, and public baths. Even though grocery shops and stalls are allowed to stay open, they're also feeling the pinch.
We can't save or put money aside. We just live to pay rent, to eat, and that's it. We can't do anything else besides that.
The rate of employment in the informal sector in Morocco is almost 80%, one of the highest in North Africa. It also generates the largest number of jobs. The 2.4 million informal workers represent nearly half of the working population. The work they do makes up around a fifth of the country's GDP. Transportation services have also been affected. The government has cut the number of passengers allowed in single taxis from 6 to 3, slashing the income of taxi drivers.
This measure doesn't help us because we are already living in a crisis. It's difficult to just be able to earn the daily minimum to give to the owners of the taxi.
King Mohammed VI has set up a $1 billion fund to help vulnerable sectors maintain jobs and operations. And for those reduced to earning from whoever they can stop on the streets, it's a lifeline they are desperate to grab hold of. Laila Humairah, TRT World.
Well, for more, let's go to Sher Verick in Geneva. He's the head of the Employment Strategies Unit at the International Labour Organization. Welcome to Money Talks, Sher. Now, the equivalent to the labour of 195 million full-time workers lost in the second quarter alone. That's quite an alarming figure. Can you explain to us how you came to that number?
Indeed, as we are all been witnessing and experiencing in recent weeks, the crisis has deepened significantly. And in line with that, the ILO, we have updated our estimates of the impact of the crisis on the labour market. We don't have, very widespread data on unemployment, but we have used a new methodology to identify what is the impact on the labour market by looking at the reduction of working hours. And indeed, the estimates that we have released today show a reduction in global working hours of 6.7%, which is equivalent to, as you mentioned, 195 million full-time workers. So this is a very severe impact and indeed is significantly worse than what we saw in the global financial crisis.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are about 2 billion informal workers around the world, hundreds of millions in places like India alone. Can you explain to us how those workers who really don't have a safety net or aren't officially on the books, how are they affected by this crisis?
Indeed, they are some of the most vulnerable in this crisis because, as you have mentioned, they don't have any forms of social protection. They typically don't have much savings to live off. And 60% in the world of the workers in the world are indeed informally employed. And in some countries, you mentioned Morocco, up to 80%. In India is around 90%. This is the majority. This is the norm for most workers. And they are in critical need of support in this time of the crisis. Lockdown measures are affecting them particularly severely. And key measures to support them now include social protection. So really getting money into the hands of those informal workers and those informal enterprises.
Now, what's the scope for recovery here when the pandemic ends, which hopefully it will soon, but after that, will these jobs return?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think anyone has the answer yet, but what we are pushing for is to be prepared for that recovery already. We don't, of course, know exactly when that recovery will start. It's too early to say, but it is absolutely critical that we look at all the measures that we have in countries to not only keep the economy from collapsing, which many countries have resorted to unprecedented monetary and fiscal policies, which is correct, but we now have to start thinking about how these measures are going to support a job-rich recovery. So this will continue to involve those type of stimulus measures, but also the continuing support for the enterprises, for jobs and for incomes is going to be absolutely critical. And we're going to need to keep a close eye on those vulnerable groups, as we've discussed, informal workers, but potentially also women, the low-skilled, etc. So this is really critical as we move over the coming weeks and months and hopefully soon into that recovery phase.
Okay, Sher Verick from the International Labour Organization in Geneva, thank you again for your time.